Welcome to Tell Me More Stories Told As podcast.
Great to be here.
Today, we're actually embarking on quite an adventure, I think, into the world of tariffs.
Yeah, it sounds maybe a bit dry, but it's really not. Think of it like a hidden map, you know, guiding global trade, lots of twists and
Okay,
turns.
I like that. A hidden map. So, just to start, what is a tariff, fundamentally?
Well, at its heart, it's a tax. Usually it's a tax on goods coming into a country. That's an import tariff. The importer pays it.
Right.
Less commonly, you might see an export tariff tax on goods leaving, paid by the exporter. But imports are the main focus.
Okay, so it's a tax, but it sounds like it's more than just government revenue, right?
Oh, much more. Tariffs are a tool.
Hmm.
A lever, really. Governments use them to influence trade flows, maybe protect their own industries.
Protect domestic industries. Okay, that makes sense. So we've got quite a bit to unpack here.
We do. We've gathered a lot of information on the history, the arguments, the pros and cons, and how tariffs are used today.
And our mission, basically, is to pull out the most interesting bits for our listeners. Why should we care about tariffs? How do they actually impact us?
Exactly. Because they really do affect economies, even our daily lives,
Yeah.
in ways you might not expect. Prepare for some aha moments, I think.
All right, let's start at the beginning then. The word itself, tariff. Where does that come from? It sounds kind of official.
It does, but its journey is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It's a real linguistic adventure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it comes into English from French, which got it from Italian, which got it from medieval Latin,
Okay.
which in turn borrowed it from Ottoman Turkish Tariff, that came from Persian Tarif, and the ultimate root is Arabic, Taif.
Wow, Arabic. That's quite a path. What did taif mean?
Well, it had a range of meanings, like notification, description, definition, announcement, but also, crucially, inventory of fees to be paid.
Ah, okay. Inventory of fees. Makes sense.
And it comes from the Arabic verb arafa, which means to know, to recognize, to find out.
So the word itself hints at this long history of knowing and listing fees for trade.
Precisely. It tells you tariffs aren't some new idea. They've been around in some form for a very, very long time.
So not a modern invention then. How far back are we talking?
Oh, deep into antiquity. Ancient Athens, for example.
Really? Athens?
Yeah, the port of Piraeus, big, busy port. They had a system of levies, including a specific 2% tax on goods brought into the market through the docks.
2%. Doesn't sound huge today, maybe, but significant then.
Definitely. And interestingly, the Athenian government didn't just tax goods there. They also controlled things like money lending and, really importantly, grain transport through Piraeus.
So even back then, it was tied into broader economic control, not just revenue.
Exactly. Power, control, revenue, it was all mixed together from the start.
Okay, let's jump forward. Britain, a major player in trade history. When did they really start using tariffs strategically?
Well, Britain's story is fascinating, especially regarding protectionism. You see early signs in the 14th century. Edward III actually banned the import of woolen cloth.
Banned it outright. Why?
It boosts local manufacturing to give English cloth makers a chance to develop without foreign competition flooding the market.
A clear protectionist move then. Did that trend continue?
It absolutely did. Henry VII, later on in 1489, increased export duties on raw wool
Why tax exports?
to keep the raw material in England for their own manufacturers to use, rather than letting it go cheaply to competitors abroad.
Ah, clever.
And the Tudor monarchs, like Henry VIII and Elizabeth III, they really leaned into this. Protectionism, subsidies, government support. Some sources even mention state-sponsored industrial espionage to get manufacturing secrets,
Wow, really going all out.
all aimed at building up the English wool industry. And it worked. Eventually, England became the world's largest wool producer. Tariffs and these other policies were key.
So a deliberate strategy. Was there a specific point where this became like official government policy doctrine?
A really key moment was 1721 under Robert Walpole. His government introduced a raft of policies specifically designed to promote manufacturing.
How so? What did they do?
They raised tariffs quite significantly on imported manufactured goods, making foreign products more expensive.
Okay.
But they also introduced export subsidies for their own manufactured goods, making them cheaper abroad. And crucially, they lowered or eliminated tariffs on imported raw materials needed by British factories.
Right, so make the inputs cheap, protect the final product, and help sell it abroad. That's a comprehensive plan.
Exactly. Walpole himself supposedly said something like, "Nothing helps public welfare more than exporting manufactured goods and importing foreign raw materials." That was the
Yeah,
philosophy.
captures it perfectly. And Britain stayed protectionist for a long time.
Very much so. By the 1820s, the average tariff rate on manufactured imports was incredibly high, something like 45 to 55%.
45 to 55%, that's a massive barrier.
Huge. And it wasn't just about protecting industries at home. They actively restricted manufacturing in their colonies, too.
How did they manage that?
Well, take the American colonies. Britain essentially steered them towards producing low-value raw materials, timber, cotton, tobacco, and actively discouraged them from setting up competing manufacturing industries
Keeping them dependent, basically?
and ensuring a market for British manufactured goods. It was a tightly controlled system.
Any specific examples that really stand out?
Yeah, here's a really interesting one, a fun fact, if you like. Britain actually banned the import of cotton textiles from India for a time.
Ban them. Why? Were they low quality?
Quite the opposite. Indian cotton textiles were actually superior to British ones at the time. They banned them because they were too good and presented too much competition.
Get out! That's incredible. Banning something because it's better.
It shows how serious they were about protecting their own nascent textile industry. They also passed the Wool Act, forbidding the colonies from exporting woolen fabrics anywhere except Britain.
Wow. Controlling every angle.
Absolutely. They wanted the colonies providing raw wool to Britain, not competing with British woolen goods elsewhere. They even incentivized raw material exports from America and cut import duties on those materials coming into Britain.
A completely managed system for the benefit of the mother country. But, as we know, Britain later became the great champion of free trade. What happened?
The big turning point was the repeal of the Corn Laws in 1846.
The Corn Laws.
Right.
Right, those protected British farmers.
Exactly. They restricted grain imports, keeping food prices high. Repealing them was a massive shift towards free trade, driven partly by manufacturing interests who wanted cheaper food for their workers, and also by the Irish famine.
Lower food prices, more open markets. Did the rest of the world follow Britain's lead?
Not really, no. While Britain moved towards free trade, other rising powers, especially the U.S. and Germany, remained highly protectionist.
And what was the result of that divergence?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Despite Britain having a significant technological lead at the time, its overall industrial growth actually started to lag behind the protectionist U.S. and Germany from the 1870s onwards.
Lag behind, even with better technology.
Yeah. And by around 1880, the U.S. economy had actually overtaken Britain's in size.
That's counterintuitive. You'd think free trade and tech leadership would guarantee dominance.
It's a point economic historians debate fiercely. But one argument is that Britain's free trade policy, while perhaps benefiting consumers with lower prices, left its industries exposed to growing competition from protected industries in the U.S. and Germany, which could develop scale and catch up.
So free trade might have inadvertently helped its rivals develop.
That's one interpretation, and it led to Britain eventually rethinking its position.
Rethinking? How so?
By the early 1900s, around 1903, they were facing serious competition from countries using high tariffs and subsidies. So the idea of fiscal retaliation emerged.
Fiscal retaliation.
Basically, fighting fire with fire, using the threat of British tariffs to force other countries to lower theirs. There was this famous phrase coined by Lord Lansdowne, comparing the threat of retaliatory tariffs to pointing a gun a little bigger than everyone else's in a room full of gunmen.
The big revolver. I think I've heard that.
Exactly. It became a popular slogan. It showed even the champions of free trade were feeling the pressure and considering tariffs as a weapon.
Did they actually use the big revolver? Did they go back to protectionism then?
Not immediately in a big way, but the real reversal came later, driven by the Great Depression.
Okay.
In 1932, facing economic catastrophe, Britain finally abandoned free trade and brought back large-scale tariffs. They recognized they'd lost ground to the U.S. and Germany, which had remained largely protectionist.
But was it too late by then?
Many argue yes. It helped stabilize things to some extent, but it didn't restore Britain's earlier economic dominance. The world had changed.
A really complex history there. Okay, let's switch focus to the United States. You mentioned they stayed protectionist longer.
Yes. The U.S. has its own long and very significant history with tariffs, right from the start. The Tariff of 1789 was one of the very first acts passed by the new Congress.
And its purpose? Protection?
Primarily revenue, initially. Right. The new federal government desperately needed money, and tariffs were a key source. So for a while, the policy was often described as low tariffs for revenue only.
But there were protectionist voices early on.
Absolutely. The most famous proponent was Alexander Hamilton, the first Treasury Secretary.
Yeah, right.
In his report on manufacturers, He laid out the classic infant industry argument.
Explain that again.
The idea is that new developing industries in a country can't immediately compete with established industries from abroad. So, Hamilton argued they need temporary protection through tariffs to give them space to grow, improve efficiency, and reach a point where they can compete.
Shielding them while they mature.
Exactly. He believed this was vital for the U.S. to become economically independent, not just reliant on European manufacturers. The promise was that, eventually, these protected industries would become efficient, and prices would actually fall for consumers.
A very influential idea. Did it take hold?
It did. While tariffs fluctuated, the general trend, especially from around 1816 up until World War II, was towards significant protectionism. The U.S. had some of the highest average tariff rates on manufactured goods in the world during much of this period.
And the Civil War, how did that affect things?
The Civil War was a huge catalyst for higher tariffs. The industrial North favored protectionism, while the agrarian South, reliant on imports, opposed it.
Right.
With the South seceding, the North controlled policy. Lincoln was a protectionist, and during the war, tariffs were raised significantly to around 44%.
44%.
And that stuck.
High tariffs largely remained in place long after the war. The goal was clearly to promote American industrialization and, proponents argued, protect American workers' wages from cheaper foreign labor.
So, many historians link this long period of protectionism to America's rise as an industrial powerhouse.
Yes, very much so. Some argue it was a critical ingredient in that transformation, shielding nascent industries during their crucial growth phase. The U.S. was, in many ways, the poster child for protectionist development in the 19th century.
But then the story takes a darker turn, doesn't it, Smoot-Hawley?
Yes. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. It's infamous for a reason.
What did it do?
It dramatically increased tariffs on thousands of imported goods, raising rates to very high levels, just as the Great Depression was taking hold.
And the impact?
Disastrous. It's almost universally seen by economists as a major policy error that deepened the Depression.
Wow.
By provoking immediate and widespread retaliation from other countries. They slapped tariffs on U.S. goods in return. The result was a collapse in international trade.
It backfired completely.
Spectacularly. Instead of protecting American jobs, it choked off export markets and made the global economic situation much, much worse. One source calls it synonymous with disastrous policymaking. Global trade is estimated to have fallen by as much as 2/3 afterwards.
2/3? That's staggering. A very stark lesson.
It really is. And it leads us nicely into the general arguments for and against tariffs, because Smoot-Hawley highlights the potential downsides so clearly.
Okay, so let's lay those out. Arguments for tariffs. We've mentioned infant industries. What else?
Protection against dumping is a common one.
Dumping. Selling goods too cheaply.
Yeah, selling goods in a foreign market below their cost of production or below their home market price. Proponents argue tariffs are needed to counteract this, claiming it's unfair competition, perhaps enabled by foreign government subsidies, currency manipulation, or lower labor or environmental standards.
Leveling the playing field in theory. That's the idea. And beyond infant industries in general, some argue developing countries specifically might need tariffs to build any kind of industrial base at all, to diversify away from just exporting raw materials.
Yeah.
There's even an argument made by some that strict free trade has actually harmed developing nations, and that more strategic, mercantilist policies like those used by, say, South Korea or China during their development have proven more effective.
Interesting perspective. Okay, now the arguments against tariffs. Why do most economists seem wary of them?
The core economic argument is that tariffs distort markets and reduce overall economic welfare.
How do they distort markets?
By artificially raising the price of imported goods. This means consumers pay more and they have less choice. Domestic producers facing less competition can also raise their prices.
So consumers lose out.
Generally, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Economists argue this loss to consumers usually outweighs the gains to protected domestic producers and the government revenue collected. It creates inefficiency.
What about jobs and output? Don't tariffs protect those?
Studies often show the opposite, or at least mixed results. While jobs might be saved in the specific protected industry, jobs can be lost in other sectors. Think about industries that use the imported goods as inputs, their costs go up. Or industries that face retaliatory tariffs from other countries, they lose export sales. Overall, research often links tariff hikes to declines in domestic output, productivity, and sometimes higher unemployment.
And trade deficits, people often say tariffs will fix those.
Economists mostly disagree. Trade deficits are more about the balance between a country's overall spending and saving or investment and saving. Tariffs don't really change those fundamentals. Plus, as we saw with Smoot-Hawley, retaliation is a major risk. You protect one industry, but your trading partners hit back, harming other domestic industries and potentially causing inflation.
It sounds like a recipe for trade wars.
It often is, which generally leaves everyone worse off.
Okay, so that's the theory and the history. What about today? Are tariffs still a major tool?
Oh, absolutely. They haven't gone away. Russia, for example, has been noted for various protectionist measures. India has increased tariffs on many goods recently, explicitly trying to boost domestic manufacturing under their Make in India initiative.
Interesting. Anyone going the other way?
Yes, actually. Switzerland just abolished tariffs on all industrial products in 2024. They're betting it will boost their economy.
A bold move.
And then on the other hand, you have major actions like the U.S. announcing significant tariff increases in April 2025, potentially pushing rates to levels not seen in decades. So it's still a very active policy area with different countries moving in different directions.
It's definitely not just a historical artifact that's still very relevant.
And always political. Remember, the U.S. tariff of 1789 was not just about money, it was a statement of national independence.
True.
But tariffs can also cause huge political fights within a country. The nullification crisis in the U.S. in 1832 was largely about tariffs, and unpopular tariffs can even lead to social unrest. There were meat riots in Chile in 1905, partly triggered by tariffs on cattle imports.
Wow. Meat riots. It shows how these policies can hit ordinary people directly.
They certainly can. And behind the scenes, there's this whole complex machinery, how customs duties are calculated based on the value of goods, the harmonized system for classifying everything.
The codes you see on import documents.
Exactly. And customs authorities trying to enforce it all, dealing with evasion.
Yeah.
Plus things like duty-free allowances for travelers or special economic zones where tariffs might not apply. It's intricate.
Okay, we have covered a lot of ground here. From the ancient world and the meaning of the word itself, through Britain's rise and shifts, America's long protectionist phase, the disaster of Smoot-Hawley, and right up to modern practices and the ongoing debates.
It's clear they've been used as shields for industry, tools for revenue, political weapons, but also that the economic arguments against them are strong, focusing on market distortions and consumer costs.
What really stands out is how context matters. A policy that worked or seemed to work in one era might be disastrous in another, especially with how interconnected the world is now.
Absolutely. Britain's experience, Smoot-Hawley, powerful lessons there.
And if you, listening, are finding this journey as fascinating as we are, definitely hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss our future deep dives here on Tell Me More. We'll keep digging into these stories that shape our world.
Yeah, please do subscribe.
Now, back to tariffs. Is there anything else we should touch on? Maybe some nuances?
Well, one thing is that the economic debate isn't always the whole picture. National security sometimes gets invoked as a reason for tariffs protecting industries deemed vital for defense, for example.
Right, protecting defense manufacturing or critical supplies.
Exactly. And there's also the idea of the optimal tariff.
Optimal tariff sounds optimistic.
It's a theoretical concept, mainly applicable to large countries that have enough market power to potentially influence world prices. The theory suggests such a country could impose a tariff that improves its terms of trade, basically, making imports cheaper relative to exports and increase its own national welfare.
But does that work in reality?
Usually not, because of retaliation. The moment one country tries to impose an optimal tariff, its trading partners are likely to hit back with their own tariffs, and you end up in a trade war that hurts everyone. So, it's more of a theoretical possibility than a practical policy prescription.
Okay, so the real world gets in the way.
Pretty much. Another huge complication today is global supply chains.
Ah, yeah. Things being made in multiple countries.
Exactly. If you put a tariff on an intermediate good, a component or material imported by your own domestic manufacturers, you might actually be hurting the very industry you intend to help by raising its production costs.
Making them less competitive.
Precisely. We're seeing that play out right now with some recent tariffs. It shows how interconnected everything is. A tariff isn't just a simple barrier anymore. It sends ripples through these complex chains.
It's like pulling one thread and potentially messing up the whole pattern.
That's a good analogy. And then you have digital trade services, software which often bypass physical borders entirely, posing new challenges for traditional tariff systems. Plus, increasingly, it's non-tariff barriers that matter more.
Like regulations, standards.
Yes, different product standards, complex customs procedures, licensing requirements. These can be bigger hurdles than tariffs themselves sometimes.
So tariffs are just one part of a much bigger, evolving trade picture.
A historically very important part, but yes, part of a larger puzzle. Understanding that history, the economic arguments, the political uses, and the modern context, it gives you a crucial lens to view current events and the ongoing debates about globalization.
It really does. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's undeniable that tariffs are way more than just taxes. They're these incredibly complex tools, packed with history, capable of shaping economies and sparking fierce debate.
And the core tension remains. Are they a necessary shield sometimes, or mostly a harmful barrier to the benefits of trade? There's no single answer that satisfies everyone.
And it's important to remember, isn't it, that the effects aren't spread evenly. Tariffs create winners and losers within a country.
Absolutely. Certain industries might benefit, while consumers or other industries pay the price. That's why they're always politically contentious.
So here's a final thought for everyone listening. We live in this incredibly interconnected global economy now. We've looked at centuries of tariff history, the good, the bad, the complicated. Considering all that, what do you think is the best way forward? How can nations balance supporting their own people and industries with the undeniable benefits that come from trading and competing globally?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
No easy answers, requires balancing economic theory, historical lessons, and current realities.
Indeed. Well, thanks for joining us on this exploration on Tell Me More Stories Told As podcast. We hope it's given you a much richer understanding of the complex story behind tariffs.
Hope so too. It's been a fascinating discussion.
Until next time, keep asking questions and keep exploring.